Hey, now it's time to stop failing vocabulary in context questions because you don't have knowledge of words. Because trust me, I have about 3 proven strategies that can still help you get the answers correctly, even with your comparatively limited knowledge of English words. And I'm going to take you by the hand and show you how those 3 methods can work every single time. The third approach, in fact, you're going to learn in this video today is probably one you have not heard before and something I consider very useful, especially for students with limited knowledge of English vocabulary. Now, you would find that some of these approaches you're going to hear today, some of these methods you're going to hear today, you can use one independently on a particular question, and sometimes you could find that you will need the combination of 2 or all 3 methods on a particular question as well, depending on how difficult the question could be, especially in your module 2. That's when you do very well on your module 1. You're going to get tougher vocabulary and context questions in your module 2 of the reading section. So you want to also prepare for that, which is why, of course, I'm here at your service. Now, the first approach, the first method you want to apply, you want to read the text and try to have a sense of the context. Now we'll explain what that means, right? Now, every passage has a subject matter. There is a storyline, there is a scope, and a subject matter. Now, what is the subject matter? The subject matter is simply the topic of discussion, and the scope is the particular aspect of the topic treated. Right? Now, where you understand the context, right, you can understand certain word choices that should work for specific context. So, certain words, like a word like invention, would work in context about technology or business. But then you wouldn't necessarily find that word working a lot where you have a poem or you have an excerpt from a novel. What you would rather have in a poem or an excerpt from a novel would be something like creative, inventive, stylistics, anything that points to unique writing pattern, a rebranded way of writing, right? Which is, of course, what innovation could mean. So the word innovation would not work in a context discussing literature or poem or excerpt from a novel. It would work in business or technological circles better. So you see, so you have to have a context of the text by reading the text and having an idea of that story. By the time you're done doing that, you want to pick up clues. Now, by your clues, I mean your transitions, your pointers, right? Your punctuation marks, right? All of those should indicate to you the nature of the word you need. So you work a lot. You're going to see that in practice towards the end of this video anyway. Now, the last thing you want to do, of course, is to just go to your options. Of course, predict what the answer should look like. Remember, I haven't read the part you understood the context. You want to predict what the answer should look like, then look at your options for a synonym of that prediction you made. Now, the second approach is something I like to call the plugging in method. Now, this is time consuming, but it also in a way requires your knowledge of context. Yes, I'm sorry, it is less time consuming actually, because you only are required to start reading the text immediately with the options. Yes, so you plug in option A into the blank and you read the whole story. You plug in option B, you read the whole story. Now, once you read the options into the blank, right, when you plug in the right option, you would immediately tell, because you just match and make simple, logical, grammatical sense. Yes. Now, the final approach, probably the most important one you're going to learn in this class today. Now, this can work with the combination of any of the previous 2. How to break down words. Tell you words you consider complex, right? Big words. And I tell my students a lot that there is no original big words in English. Every word in English, every big or long form word you see in English is a combination of numerous root words, base words, suffixes, and prefixes, right? So your suffixes, prefixes, your base words, and your root words. Now we'll explain what this means with a beautiful example. Take, for instance, the word prognosticator. That sounds like a very big word, a mouthful. When you see that, you put off, I've not seen this word before, but calm down. You have seen a lot of words in that word before, and you have probably used them. Yes. Now, we have a prefix, pro, right? And in what context have you heard the word pro? You want to ask yourself. It is often used to mean something done beforehand. It's often used to mean beforehand or a foreshadowing. Pronouns, for example. The word gnostic from the word knowledge. So combination of pro and gnostic. We have prior knowledge, before knowledge, foreknowledge. So is of course a suffix you would often see to refer to a human being that is an expert in an area. So put it all, you have prognosticator simply means someone that is able to make prediction about any kind of situation, right? So you see, I just broke down that big word. So don't be put off when you see a big word, because trust me, there is a combination of 3 letters or 4 letters that you are already familiar with, and all of those put together form that big word. Now let's put these 3 tips in practice. Come with. Have first is a straightforward one. I have seen some pointers already from my quick glance of the passage, and I'm going to apply the first method, which is of course reading, understanding the context of conversation, and using my clues to make a prediction about what the answer should look like. Researchers and conservationists stress that biodiversity loss due to invasive species is dash. So I think they want to define this is about something from the biological sciences. So I know that the right word I need should be a word that makes sense in line with all of these other words: biodiversity, invasive species. And they said that it is dash. So I know I need an adjective to help me qualify this sort of biodiversity loss. Now, the for example is the transition that should help me explain what this means. So even if I didn't understand the idea before the for example, I should understand what is said after the for example and make a sense of that for my answer. For example, people can take simple steps, just washing their footwear after travel, to avoid introducing potentially invasive organisms into new environments. So my essential words here: avoiding introducing. So taking simple steps like washing of hands so as to avoid introducing invasive organisms. So definitely, sometimes even the word you need for your answer is a synonym of the word mentioned after or before the blank. So this biodiversity loss is avoidable. Simple. So see how I was able to make that prediction from all of understanding the context. And what is synonymous with the word avoidable from the options? Preventable. Perfect. We have an answer. Have you? Now let's try the second method with another question. We'll plug in each and read instead of wasting time reading at first and making a prediction, which is less time consuming, like I mentioned earlier. It is by no means substantial to recognize the influence of Dutch painter on Ali Banizda's painting. Okay, that means by no means. Remember, pay attention to the words preceding the blank. Tell me when the word is negative like this. It is by no means. In other words, it is not substantial to recognize the influence of this person on this other person's painting. Now, we now have indeed. So this let me explain this some more. Banizda himself cites Bosch as an inspiration. Now you see, so if Banizda himself cites Bosch as an inspiration, you cannot say it is not substantial to recognize the influence of Bosch on Ali's painting. So this is wrong. It contradicts the text. Let's try the other one. It is by no means satisfying. In other words, it is not satisfying. Right? So the information we have here obviously is positive. Banizda himself cites but an inspiration. So you cannot say it is not satisfying. So this is a contradicting option 2. It goes off. Unimportant. It is by no means unimportant. In other words, it is important. Notice, by no means unimportant. Unimportant is a negative word. Placed in front of another negative phrase or word, it becomes positive. I think it's a mathematical rule that you can also apply here. It is by no means unimportant. In other words, it is important to recognize the influence of Dutch painter Bosch on Ali Banizda's painting. And Banizda himself cites Bosch as an inspiration. So unimportant makes a lot of sense. It is by no means appropriate. In other words, it is inappropriate. So you see another negative option. And another thing you should also notice about this question is the fact that all options are positive except one. And whenever you have that, there is one odd option in the list. There is one option that is positive among negative words, or there is one option that is negative among positive words. You already know your best answer should be that word that is odd in the list. So yes, I've applied the second rule and you see how it works, and you learn something new, which is the fact that from your options, if there are more positive word than negative word, that negative word stands a chance. Now let me see. I'm looking for on a question that has complex words, right? I think I have one here. Yes, this question right now we have words like disconcerting, acceptable, imperceptible, substantial. Okay, I think you should be familiar with what substantial means. Substantial of from the word substance. So what something is substantial, it has substance, it has value, it has worth. So you see, if I didn't know what substantial meant as a long form, but I know what substance mean. Okay, disconcerting. From the word concerting, at least you know what concert means. A concert is of course coming together and of course enjoying something in harmony. Right? Now, for them to be discomforting, the word dis is a negative prefix, and you will often find that the main words in front of which you have this, the whole meaning should be negative now. Obviously, disconcerting will now mean whatever does not cause harmony. So I'm thinking it's a negative word and it has to do with something that disrupts. Able. So you join both together, we have the possibility of accepting something. So acceptability. Imperceptible. Let's work with perceptible. If that's the complex word, how about the word perceive? I'm sure perceive is a common word. So the perceive is to notice, to be able to tell something. Now, im is another prefix in English like this that makes the whole word negative, right? So imperceptible now means something that cannot be noticed, something that cannot be perceived. So you see how I have broken down all of those words. So I don't think there's any big word. This is how I was able to deal with words right from my secondary school time, even without making recourse to dictionary. And funnily enough, most times when I do go to dictionary, I find that my predictions from what the meaning of the word is, from breaking down the words, happens to be the right answer. Close, happens to at least be close to what the word means originally in the dictionary. Now let's see how this works here, right? I would just try the first approach, which I consider the most appropriate, right? Monica Lopez and others at Brazil's institute are studying the freshwater stingray species. This species to determine whether biological characteristics such as the race, age, and sex have dash effects. So they want to define what this effect is, right, on the toxicity of the venom. So they want to determine what nature of the effect these biological characteristics of this species has on the toxicity of the venom of the species. There is a dash, which is a straight ahead pointer, like I mentioned earlier, meaning that whatever he said, they would help me explain what I should have in that blank, especially like as we saw in the, for example, on the first question we worked with. That is on that transitional word that will help you explain, repeat what was said before. That is to see if differences in these traits are altered with considerable variation in venom potency. They mentioned venom potency, so which is a rephrase of that toxicity of their venom. And a lot of times, right, when you have when you're trying to define a concept, right, you would often find that concept is mentioned somewhere and given a certain definition. So you just have to find out whether that concept was mentioned again and find out how was that concept, how was that word described. Very often, the description used for that word in the other part of the text is the synonym of the word you're looking for. So, considerable variations in venom potency, that's the qualifier we have. Considerable, in other words, substantial enough variation, right? Now, let's see. I think I've already gotten the answer. So, to see whether such characteristics, such as the race, age, and sex, have considerable, that's my prediction, effect on the toxicity, because here we have with considerable variations in venom potency. So that leaves us with this word substantial. And of course, definitely you should also do the last other tip, eliminating the options that are too negative. A cannot work. This is negative. The context is not negative. Imperceptible, another negative word. So we are left with acceptable and substantial, which brings us to what you learned when we were discussing the first approach, right? The fact that this word acceptable cannot work in this context. You can try plugging it in. So I'm trying in all the approach, right, in this particular context because of how little bit technical it is.